Well, happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the second week of the 11th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference presented by Northeastern State University. We have a whole bunch of sessions between now and Friday the 14th. Once again, I'm Bob Ailes. I'm your moderator for the session. We have with us again today Michelle as our captioner. All of our sessions are closed caption. Michelle so far has gotten to do all of them. If you want to view the captions, simply click on the closed caption icon on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. But as you can see, our session today is start making digitally accessible course documents and presentations today, not tomorrow, today.
The hook.
And we have with us Dan Arnold and Christina Moore. Nick Bongers has claimed he's sick and not there today. So anyway, all three are from Oakland University in wonderful Rochester, Michigan. I'm guessing it's a little wintry there.
It is.
Yeah. So Dan is manager of support services at Oakland University, and Christina is the virtual faculty developer. Do you create faculty or do you develop things for faculty?
I develop things for faculty. That title was an interesting one to come up with. I don't know if anyone has asked if I actually develop like virtual faculty who live online.
Oh, okay. Well, then let me turn it over to Christina and Dan.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. This is a topic near and dear to our hearts. We were voluntold, as some like to say, a couple of years ago to provide training for faculty related to web accessibility, which we'll be referring to as digital accessibility. And excuse me. And so what we've been doing throughout this last couple of years is figuring out how to take what are the larger web accessibility content guidelines and boiling them down into something that is easier for faculty to really wrap their head around and figure out what does this mean for me as a faculty member in the everyday work that I am doing. So with that, our learning outcomes for today are to define the web and accessibility standards, start to do some really preliminary evaluation of some of those course contents and how that might apply to accessibility, and then start planning a process for creating accessible material. And then start to actually make that plan and figure out what our next steps are. So if you are familiar with your raise hand option, which is available for you in Zoom, could you raise your hand if you've ever experienced any of these annoying occurrences when working online? You're supposed to use the raise hand icon, but I guess this is okay for now.
I'll raise my other hand.
Or you can just go through and sort of note them as well. So I'm sure all of us have encountered these at some point. Yep, I see some raised hands there. Broken links, confusing wording. Excuse me, there's something on. There we go. Closing that down. Confusing wording when you're reading things online that don't seem accessible in their language. Difficult color distinction, perhaps, when you're looking at slide presentations or just any web page. The video sound being too quiet or too loud, poor video quality. So we give this list of things for us to think about because these are annoying for us, but what this shows us are features of the web that may make it impossible sometimes for people with disabilities to use the internet. And actually learning these web content accessibility guidelines a bit better will actually help alleviate a lot of these problems, at least in the course material that we create. So just to clarify what we mean when we talk about accessibility, we use this really popular definition from the department, a settlement with the Department of Education that says that a person with a disability must be able to fully use the internet as well as a person without a disability. So we include this because it takes us away from a definition that is saying we need to make accommodations only when students come and tell us that some web material is not accessible, but that we should be proactive in how we're designing our digital materials, just like an architect might be when they are designing a building. So we bring that up because we're shifting from a reactive approach to a proactive approach. So just really briefly, so that if you hear these laws or regulations when you're hearing about digital accessibility, we wanted to go over them just to give you a little bit of context. So the basis of accessibility law is in the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is the core of what the law is based on. And so this was passed in 1990 before the web really was taking off as far as popular use. So eventually the question started to come up of, well, how does this apply to the web? Because at first we were thinking of physical spaces, employment opportunities, access to education. But then as use of the web became more popular, it started to become a question of what does it mean for the web to be accessible under the ADA. So what's next referred to is a revision to Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, which says that we should also be mindful of accessibility, especially as federal bodies receiving federal money, that our electronic websites need to be accessible as well. So up to this point, there has been some advocacy and work to try to get very specific guidelines passed into law. That hasn't happened yet, but the main guidelines you will hear about that guide people's design of what makes the web accessible are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is the third bullet point here. So that's why you'll often see that WCAG guidelines stuff. So our main mindset when it comes to accessibility is that digital accessibility is essential for some, but beneficial for all. So when people ask us, you know, who really benefits from digital accessibility, who is it for? These are the main points that we explain. So these web content accessibility standards are essential for what we might say is a fairly small percentage, but this is really hard to calculate. So when we say this less than 10% with impairments, that may mean that these are people who are perhaps fully blind and use a screen reader to tell them what's on their computer, people who are very hard of hearing or are deaf, along with other mobile and cognitive related impairments. But when we start to think more broadly about disabilities, such as those with learning disabilities who might overlap with some of those cognitive disabilities, the categories become much larger. We know that in many disability support services offices at institutions, that this is one of our largest categories of students who are requesting accommodations. And then even broader than that is that these standards are really beneficial for everyone and certain life needs or situational needs. So we've probably all taken advantage of captions in videos, not just those who cannot hear the audio. So this is just one example of how these guidelines really do benefit all of us. So the good part, web accessibility guidelines, the top hits. So the web content accessibility guidelines provide a lot of guidance as to this is the standard, This is how you know you've been successful in meeting that standard. But there are many of them, and some of them can be overwhelming, and sometimes we're not sure, okay, how does this provide to the stuff I'm doing every day? So what we've done is boiled this down into 6 main features to keep in mind as you're creating or choosing instructional material. So that's how your text appears, how you're using color, how you're sharing web links, how you are signifying the order and organization of your content, whether you are providing other ways of experiencing images other than just that visual component. And then if you're having time-based media like videos or audio files, that you are having captions with the videos and then transcripts with the video and the audio. So we're gonna run through just some basic things to keep in mind, and we'll also be sort of checking your knowledge to see if you might know some of these things already or what you think as we go forward. So the first one is text appearance. And this one might seem kind of obvious, but we'll provide some specific concrete guidelines that might help you as you create your material. So the 2 things that we keep in mind with text is that you're using a large enough text, especially if you're projecting something in class or if you're having a print handout, to make sure that you're opting for a larger font and a font that is more sort of plain in style, that the letters are easy to distinguish. So there isn't one set size for your text, but we do say aim for 12-point size in documents and 24-point size in slides. So as an example here, this bulleted list is a 24-point size, which might seem larger on the monitor in front of you, but it becomes even more important when you're projecting something for a larger space. And then here we have some basic recommendations as far as some fonts that you could use. So there isn't one set font list even that you have to use. So one of the questions here is, can you use Calibri? I would say yes, you can. That's actually what I've used on the left side here. Usually, what are your standard styles offered in the Microsoft Office suite is pretty safe to use. So really, we're just looking for fonts that don't have too many extra frills or swirls in them, because that can be hard, for example, for someone with dyslexia to distinguish between the letters. So some of the things that we will talk about are not just for people who are using a screen reader who have no visual input, but maybe for people with maybe hard distinctions of seeing certain things. Okay, so now we get to test your knowledge a little bit. We're just going to let people sort of assess on their own. They can use the chat to share if they want. But when we think about color, which one has the highest contrast? So we're having sort of a vision test here today. Yeah. Yeah, so most people get this one, yeah. So we have C. And what would have the worst color contrast? Yeah. Yeah, that one's quite hard. And it's even harder when you're looking at a projection and you're sitting in the audience. So we also include B here because this one can be harder for people to see based on their ability to see certain shades. So red-green color blindness can make something like B more difficult to see. So we're doing a vision check here to emphasize the point of being mindful of color. So we're going to bring up 2 things that have to do with color. So the first is contrast. there are specific guidelines for how high the contrast needs to be. And we do have a help document, or you could do a web search that will point you to tools that will help you test this contrast. But for the sake of kind of ease of implementing this, we just say opt for a higher contrast if possible. But you can still use color. Your world doesn't have to be black and white just for color contrast purposes. And then secondly, to be mindful of how we're using color to signify meaning. So if we are color coding something in our syllabi or in our other resource documents, that we're not just using color to signify something. So a good way to sort of kind of have a thought experiment with this is, if my students had a black and white version of my syllabus, would they still be able to understand everything that they need to? So one example that I included here in the slide is using red text to connote required readings. So you can still continue doing that practice. I would just also recommend a text equivalent, which might be saying the word required right at the front. So I actually included on this slide as an example of how sometimes I've used color to signify meaning, like where I am in an outline. So that wouldn't be clear, except that I do have a heading title on this slide, so that will help with that meaning. But that was just one example that I realized. So it's something we might do more often than we realize, so I wanted to bring that up. So this is just one example of how you could explain how you're using color, if you are using color in this way. So I want to move on to web links. So you have a 50-50 chance here. What would be the proper way to share a web link, A or B? And I'd also, if you do want to use the chat window, I'd also like to hear why you think that choice, because there can be a logic to both, although there is one right answer. And you can use the chat, or you can use the audio as well. Yes. Yes. Yep, exactly. So A is better for a screen reader because it will signify that this text is taking you to the specific destination. So the issue with B is that otherwise a screen reader would read it letter by letter, symbol by symbol, which would not only be annoying, but it would be difficult for someone to know where that's going to go. And screen readers do have an option of listing all of the links on a page and signifying where they're going. So that makes it even more difficult. Sometimes people will say they include B if they anticipate a situation where they're printing something out and they want people to know where to go, if they want to type it in, or sometimes they'll say they want to provide both options. And both options is always a safe choice based on context, but A is the one that will be clearest and most helpful for. So here's the actual rule here. So I think someone in the chat had said, you know, we also don't want to be hyperlinking the words click here or here, because then we just have a bunch of here's.
This is Christine.
Question? Yeah.
From who?
Is this Christine?
Hi, how are you?
Question? Okay. So this is just another example here. So if this second link.
Yeah, okay, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so this second link shows a link that would be difficult to
This was made quite a while ago, so.
Should I think someone is speaking and we're kind of hearing everyone. Could everyone go on mute? I think I'm hearing Christine talking.
Of what, March?
Yeah, I think
So
Christine
you want me to come in 3 weeks after my
would you
scheduled
be able
appointment
to,
with an appointment the following next week?
unmute
Or
Christine?
like shortly after that or something?
Bob, are you there?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm having someone talk over and
And that's only because Dr. Klink was forced out.
Bob, are you there? I'm sorry, I can't mute her. Thank you. Okay, thanks. Okay. So we have that one basically down. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one. So another 50-50% chance here. So if we're talking about sequence of lists, which would be the proper way to list the colors of the US flag? A, which includes a bulleted list, or B, which includes a numbered list? And then again, if you want to include rationale behind that, that would be helpful too. Anyone venture a guess here? Okay, so B, easier to identify. Okay, good. It's always more exciting when there's different answers to these. IDK is good. That means you have something to learn today. So, again, context does matter, but the default answer here would be that A is correct because the order does not matter for this list. While those who grew up in the United States might be used to saying red, white, and blue, it's not wrong to say white, blue, red. So when the order does not matter, a bulleted list is more appropriate. But like someone said, if you are if you are using numbered lists for a specific purpose, like if you want to offer your class a bunch of options and you want people to be able to say, well, I think number 2 is the appropriate choice or something like that. So that might be context specific. But when it comes to an ordered list, we're thinking things that need to go in that order. So directions on how to do something, basically just anything that needs to proceed in a certain order.
And just to kind of add on to that, somebody commented that maybe a screen reader wouldn't pick up on bullet points. It actually does. There's HTML behind a bulleted list or a numbered list that tells a screen reader if it is an ordered or an unordered list.
So that's actually kind of a smaller way to start thinking about sequence, but what actually is a more significant thing to implement is thinking about how we're organizing sections in our documents. So the headings, subheadings, and the body text of your papers. So this is one example. So this is a Google Doc. They are virtually, they appear the same to those of us who are sighted. We might see a little bit of spacing difference between some of the sections. So while visually they look the same, their accessibility is quite different. So in the bad example on the left, there are no heading styles. What I've done is what we normally have grown up doing as we use the computer is we make the font larger so that we're signifying that's a section heading. Whereas on the right, we see a menu on the side that offers the navigation. All of those are using heading styles. So what I've shown in the screen reader is a drop-down menu that shows the heading styles. So this is a really pared down version. Dan's going to demonstrate using this in an actual like Word document. So what I've included as a link here, and you can also Google this, is seeing how a screen reader will go through a document that is accessible versus isn't accessible. But I've specifically heard from people who are blind or rely on a screen reader that this is one of the most important things for them to be able to access documents and web material. So this is a really good example of essential for some but beneficial for all. So this is essential for those who are visually impaired because otherwise they can't see how the content is supposed to be organized. Whereas it's beneficial for all because it's less work for us in creating those headings manually. We can instead predetermine the style we want and then just click that button and it will create the heading the way we want it to be. And then for our readers, which is sometimes ourselves as well, it's so much easier to navigate your document because you can hop down to sections. You kind of get that clickable outline right on the left there. So now Dan's going to show how this would work in a Word document. So now we need to share. Okay. Are you okay with doing this, or do you want to just share my whole document or my whole desktop?
Whichever.
Okay, so do you want to start with bad or good?
I want to start with a bad example, please.
Okay. Where is it? Oh, there's it.
So we call this our bad example.
Oh,
And it
that's
just-
the good one. Sorry,
this
it
is the
must have
good one?
popped up.
Well, we can
It's
still
right
use
behind
the bad example here.
Yep.
So with this, I mean, just general eye test, it doesn't look like anything's bad here. We've got the literature review section tagged out, level 2 heading, level 3 headings. Everything looks really good here. The problem with that is that a screen reader can't tell a user that this is a literature review section or that this is a level 2 heading. In fact, this is just bold text at this point. There's no kind of style associated with that. And it doesn't always understand some of the nuance or context that you may be inferring when you use bold or use italics. So when you look at this paper and use some of the other features that are up here, who's seen these items up here at the top of Microsoft Word before? There's normal, no spacing, heading 1, heading 2. I looked at those for years and completely ignored them. It's actually these tools that we're referring to help make documents accessible. And you actually have this Styles pane tab here. If you are in a Windows, you might be able to see a little button right here in the bottom right corner of that to pull down the navigation or the Styles pane as well. But when I start to pull up the Styles pane, you start to see there's all sorts of different styles through here. Everything from a heading 1, to be a top level heading, heading 2, heading 3. We even have items for italicizing, where say in literature courses, it may be that you're being subtle with something. You can use these types of heading styles, use these different styles to put that kind of meaning into the things that you're writing and the documents that you're providing to students if you want them to pick up on some of the subtleties there as well. We have intense emphasis. If you really are super passionate about something, you can start to include some of these items in here. So I'm going to take a look at the bad example here for just a bit longer. If I were to come here and say, all right, well, I want this to be a heading 1. And I want this to be a level 2 heading. And here's a level 3 heading. I can just start clicking and assigning these things on there. Well, I don't necessarily want this to be part of my heading, but I can move it down here. If I wanted to have part 2, or just say a second level 2 heading, I can now come in and make this a level 2 heading as well. Now, one of the great features I found out afterwards, maybe a bit too late, is that if I want to change what level heading 2 or heading 1, what any of these look like throughout an entire document, it's very quick and very easy to change it throughout the entire paper, which would have been really handy when I was writing a dissertation or when you're writing a manuscript for publication, that I can come in here and I can modify any of these styles. For example, if I want heading 2 to be 10-point font, and maybe I want it to be a different font style, which for publishers that drives them crazy, but for example purposes that should be helpful. You'll now see that anything that was a level 2 heading has changed along with that. So where this is another one of the essential for some, beneficial for all, is that if you're teaching a writing intensive course, or if you're writing papers yourself, knowing these couple of tricks can be very helpful in updating a document, because when I was writing my dissertation, I probably spent hours just changing heading styles and going through a 150-page manuscript to get all those done. Little did I know that these tools were here, these options were here that would have allowed me to make those updates in seconds, rather than, say, taking valuable hours out of my life that I could never, ever get back. So that's just a quick foray into how we can use those heading styles to start organizing papers as well. Another item is your navigation pane, and you can find this under the View tab within Windows as well, or within Word as well. When I click on the navigation pane, I'm going to click Clear Styles pane just for right now. I can go in, and as I'm creating and adding headings, it's also putting in items for navigation, which makes it very navigable, very easy for anybody with a screen reader to jump through and do this. Originally, this paper, without using any heading styles, did not have any of those items. So for example, if I just said level 2 heading part 3, and I just made that bold, you can see that this does not show up anywhere on this table of contents here. A screen reader will ignore it because it does not have the context to be able to say, hey, this is a level 2 heading, or this should be a level 2 heading. As you can see, it doesn't match any of the other level 2 headings that I have as well. And just simply coming up here and clicking heading 2 will change it to the font size and style that you wanted. So doing this, it organizes it, and this does this within Microsoft Word. It does it in Google Documents. It's just a really helpful way to be able to quickly move through and organize your documents for yourself and for students. And again, making things clickable. It's essentially making a table of contents for you, a digital table of contents for you to use and for anybody to use. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to start showing the presentation again. So that's a very quick overview. For time purposes, I'm going to start scrolling along here. Now, oftentimes we'd hear, well, I want to use images in my documents, or I want to use images on this or here, and you can certainly start doing that. Just because it's visual doesn't mean that we can't give it some kind of alternative representation for that. It's actually called alt text. And people will say, well, I like to use images for decorative purposes, and you can absolutely do that. You can just designate it as sort of descriptive image, and screen readers will skip over that. But this one picture here can be used for a variety of purposes. And based on context, it could be used as just a descriptive image at the top of an Italian language course. You could use it in a humanities course to talk about the different types of columns that are used on the Colosseum. Or if you're talking about architectural studies, for preservation studies, you can talk about how weather as a road to the Colosseum and natural disasters have impacted over the years as well. So this is just one image that has 3 distinct potential descriptions for that. The key being with images is that you're providing a suitable alternative for any kind of educationally based content within that as well. For tables, charts, graphs, diagrams, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer for that. Oftentimes when doing quantitative research, you have to give a descriptive write-up of what you're seeing there anyways. For a longer description, you might want to have a separate document or a different space for something for that. And there are some things we're not the experts on everything and in every field, and it might be a good opportunity to have a dialogue with the student and with a disability support office on campus to say what's a suitable alternative for the student to be able to get this content in a meaningful way. Now, we also get a lot of questions about captions and transcripts, and I was happy to hear that this is being captioned as well. So kudos to Bob and the team for getting that happening as well. But there are going to be some time-based multimedia guidelines for audio and video and providing alternate formats, whether that's through captions, whether it's a transcript file, or in many cases, a visual description of what's happening. If there was some kind of educational meaning behind me going and clapping my hands, then you would see in brackets, hands clap. The best example I can give you of this is if you've watched the program before with the captions on, and a door creaks, and it says door creaking, or you hear sirens in the background, might be another example. Those are the types of descriptors that that they're talking about when they say they want to have a good visual description in there as well.
So I just wanted to pause for a moment to see if anyone had any questions. And you can share either through the chat or using audio as well. Excellent. Glad to hear it, Renee.
Yeah, it looks like this is also being recorded as well, so you can add it to your favorite video collection. So, and pushing right along.
Okay, I just wanted, we have one more coming in. Okay, so yes, experience having a deaf student.
Yep, the closed caption on YouTube videos, they're great if you're looking for auto transcribing. You can use, if you create your own videos, you can upload them to YouTube and it will auto caption them for you. It's always best to go in and check the accuracy, because with any speech to text or auto captioning, there might be some, say, lingo or some jargon that it has difficulties with, or if you have an accent, it can have difficulties with that too. YouTube is great about creating a caption and a transcript as well, so they're really on the forefront of that development. So yeah, they don't always get what you said, which can be confusing, and that's the point here, is that we want to make sure that we're as accurate as possible with any kind of captions as well, so it's a great point. With the different types of documents that are out there, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, PDFs, some of them already have built-in formatting tools that I discussed, the heading styles and the navigation panes, font-friendly lists and color contrast, all these things that Christina was talking about as well. But many of them also have a check accessibility tool, which is very, very helpful in catching some of the surface level items. It doesn't capture every single thing. There is still a human element to it, but it is a step in the right direction to start looking at, okay, are my documents accessible or inaccessible? I won't run through a full demo on that, but in the Mac version, you can actually check accessibility under the review. For the Windows version of Word, if you click on the icon to go save it, there's a check for issues area, and check accessibility is one of the options in there as well. What's nice about Microsoft is that they have this for PowerPoint and they have it for Word. It will tell you what's wrong, why to fix it, and how to fix it as well. So we got some good chat going on over there and just different things you can do, like say University of Central Florida's You Do It tool. That's great. Some people have it embedded right in their learning management system. Great conversation, you guys. Thanks. Keep adding comments out there. It's going to be helpful for everybody as we go along. Since
we are in Word, one chat question that came up earlier is what's the difference between a title and a heading 1? And what I understand is normally you just use the title style for the title of the document that you normally put, the title of your paper, the title of your article, and then heading 1, speaking in academic terms, might be like your main sections, your literature review, just those largest sections. And then any of the heading styles, as the numbers go higher, they're kind of the smaller sections that are nested within them.
So for PDFs, a lot of people said, there's a variety of different ways that PDFs are created. And that's really the important key, is how was this PDF created? If it was, say, a scanned image of a book, incredibly inaccessible. At that point, you've got a picture. It doesn't read any of the text. It could be a type of PDF where if you have one column of text on one side and a column of text on the other, screen readers can get confused and they'll just read right across the top of the first column and go to the top of the second column. With that, we've found better success with using Word documents and saving them as PDFs, or in many cases working with the library to see if there are accessible formats out there as well. But PDFs can be tricky, which is why it's important to start looking for navigable type of PDFs. And typically, if you can navigate with your keyboard using the tab button, then you found a more accessible version. But I know that students who are low vision or no vision, trying to access PDFs was a very big hurdle for them. And many companies and libraries have been getting better about finding accessible versions of the documents as well. So if you have an editable or web version, share that, get that out there. Look for alternate formats. I know that we talk about, working with librarians or other accessibility experts on campus to see if they have resources that they can help convert things into plain text as well. So a plain text document will go a long way towards, or OCR. Oftentimes OCR can be very successful or very helpful in that. There are some free web-based tools that can do OCR, the optical character recognition, to help that. So some PDFs may not have, or may be less accessible. I think we're seeing a lot more come out there being more accessible, but some older manuscripts that maybe were photocopied years ago and then uploaded and scanned, you may run into some issues there. And another important thing is prepare students for the learning environment, give early access to the materials. Christina's been really good about adopting that and forwarding our materials out to people as early as possible. So if there are any issues, they know in advance and can try to work together to find a suitable alternative. For presentations, this is where our buddy Nick usually jumps in, but I'll take the reins this time and work on his behalf while he's home recovering from Super Bowl, which was almost 2 weeks ago at this point, which is weird. But for the presentations that you build, whether it's in PowerPoint or Google Slides, videos and such, having that suitable alternative text for graphics and images, captions, and early access to the time-based materials is critical. For example, this is an output of accessibility, of a check accessibility tool within Microsoft PowerPoint. And it will tell you if things are missing, if the title of the slide is missing. It will tell you if maybe there's something that's unclear in there, and it will help you with sequencing how your screen reader is going to read a PowerPoint presentation. Because if you have multiple text boxes and you've created them in your order and then move them around in the presentation, you may want it to go slide 1, slide 2, or box 1, 2, 3, 4, but it might jump around. So knowing how your how a screen reader is going to interact with a slide if you have multiple text boxes is important as well. And just like with a Microsoft Word document, if you have an accessible template or an accessible slide, you can use that over and over. We get a lot of questions about how can I create transcripts, or that seems like a lot of work, and we don't disagree. It is a good amount of work with that, but the benefits that you have with that far exceed the upfront effort for that. We've been looking at different options for, say, just that first draft, that first run through of a script. And there's a free tool out there called Otter.ai. They actually have a Zoom integration as well. But Otter.ai is free. It will transcribe it speech to text. You can identify different speakers. You can download a plain text file. You can and export that. You can link directly to the web-based version, and you can edit anything on there as well. I tell faculty that this is a great way to get that first draft down. We're always talking about that first draft. This is an excellent starting point, but it's a way for you to create a script, to create a transcript, and if you upgrade to the paid version, which for educators is $4.99 per month, you get 6,000 minutes of transcription per month, a slew of editing features, and you can download as PDFs, as Word documents, as an SRT file, which is a time-stamped caption file as well. So the free version will give you 600 minutes per month, which is still pretty good, but for $5 a month, if you want to partner with a colleague, you have 6,000 transcription minutes per month. with that as well. That's web-based. You can get an app and you can use your phone to record as well, but a really powerful and fun tool out there is Otter.ai. And with the presentations, again, we want to use those color, the font, the types of things that we talked about earlier to make sure that, do all your links work? Do you have an acceptable size font? I know that the size of the font is something that's become increasingly important to me, in that if I'm running a practice session of a presentation, I always go to the back of the room and say, okay, is that small? Is that font too small? Is it the right size? Because I want to really pander more toward the people at the back of the room than those at the front. I figure if it's large enough and readable from the back of the room, that I think that's a positive step forward. So we also have to think about what we're linking to, whether it's in your LMS, whether it's on documents. Are these accessible things that we're linking to? Are they navigable? Can you customize them? Can you make them accessible if they aren't currently accessible? That's going to be articles, videos, anything out there within research journals as well. And what I've often done is I just say, do you have a librarian that you can speak with? Can we find a PDF of this? You found it on some random website. Is there a version on our library website that might be more accessible? But it's a good opportunity to just consult with those different types of accessibility experts out there, whether it's your teaching and learning center or your e-learning department, disability supports, and again, librarians are great resources often as well. For publishers, they've come around. They know that accessibility is important, and they're making their content increasingly more accessible. The same with any kind of technology that you may be trying to integrate into your learning management system or on your campus. They know that they have to be on the ball with respect to accessibility, and just actively seek companies that are already accessible and that it's important to them as well.
Should I take over from here?
If you like.
Sure. So some of our recommended first steps here, we'll try to touch on these briefly to leave a little bit of time for questions. We suggest using your built-in LMS tools. So there was a little bit of talk about that earlier about how some have some really robust accessibility tools, but even just using the tools right within your LMS often help ensure more accessibility than trying to create something on your own. So usually the text editor in your LMS will have some of those heading styles, will be using default fonts that are accessible, and students can change the themes often so that if there's a certain color contrast that's easier for them to perceive, they can customize that. So we really preach implementing these new updated habits for new content. So instead of being overwhelmed saying, I have to go back and caption all my old videos, or I have to go back and look at every single document I've ever created. Instead, every time you open a new document or a new PowerPoint or go to plan a new video, think, how can I plan ahead to make sure the accessibility is there? So, and then as you're learning these things, we recommend using the Check Accessibility tool to get in the habit of checking that. At the end, we say it's like using how we used to use spell check. That becomes an automatic thing now in our documents, but we used to have to remember to press that spell check button at the end. And then we really recommend, once you have something that's accessible, using that as a template going forward so that you're not having to rethink all of those steps all the time. I started to do this for myself. I'm also a doctoral student, so I created an APA template for myself so that it would automatically have those heading styles in it. When it comes to creating videos, if you are creating a polished instructional video that is showing a specific concept, we recommend starting with a script, like Dan said, maybe using a tool that helps with the transcription of that if you are having to do something that's live that isn't easily scripted beforehand. This really helps streamline the process. You really save a lot of time on the editing, and because you've really planned that content ahead well. And then we also recommend prioritizing your updates. What are the documents, the videos, the presentations you use the most? Maybe focus your energy on those first. I also recommend thinking about inclusive course design. So universal design for learning works really well with digital accessibility because it promotes using multiple ways to access learning rather than just thinking about the barriers on this one path to learning. So really briefly, universal design for learning includes increasing student choices on what texts they use or how they demonstrate their learning. And this also promotes increasing instructional variety. So what format are you offering to students? Is it always the same? And then this is also a good opportunity to talk explicitly with your students about accessibility. What does this accessibility issues look like in the health sciences, in medicine, in whatever discipline you're in? There's really interesting creative thoughts around how to address accessibility issues within our disciplines. So lastly, I got some windows floating, so I'll see if I can find it. Well, actually, we can share these slides. Oh, here we go. So I'm gonna put 2 links in the chat window. The first one is a checklist. And then I can be savvy here. I'll share that. Here we go. So these are 2 documents we often give faculty that can be helpful in thinking about your next step or just noting and remembering everything that we went over today. We know it's a lot. There we go. So this digital accessibility checklist is just a way to reflect on what you do that may already be good accessibility practices and what you think, okay, that's something I would really like to work on. And it's organized into some of those principles or those material types that we've talked about today. And then these links will go to help documents that really break down how to do these things for extra reinforcement. And then the digital accessibility for faculty quick note really boils these things that we've talked about today down into the 3 areas of instructional material that we think about, and then those 6 characteristics, along with some simple steps and some of that accessibility law language that we talked about earlier. So I think we'll end it there. I know we have 10:55 as our end time, so any last minute questions or comments that you wanted to offer? All right, we're out of time. Thanks everyone. Thanks for listening in and for trying out these tools with us.
Thank you, Christina and Dan, for providing us some really good information. I appreciate it. And I think you see everyone else did. So thank you.
All right.
Good, thanks for coming in.
And hope to see everybody in a few minutes at the top of the hour for our next session.
Okay.